Hello, everyone. I am John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives, and it is Tuesday, the 16th of September, 2025. It's time to get up to date with Harley Schlanger of the LaRouche Organization and the Schiller Institute. Uh, I captioned our show today, The Strategy of Tension, which was the subject of his talk on the Schiller Institute YouTube channel yesterday. I found it very interesting. So we plan to start there, but you never know where we will go with that. We'll see you in 30 seconds. And welcome. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives once again. And Harley Schlanger, it's great to have you back. Let's get to it. I had captioned the show today after your very brilliant talk yesterday, The Strategy of Tension. And a lot of people, I think, miss the point. I don't think that concept has been fully explained lately. And perhaps I'd like to have you start there, as well as just to say hi and good to see you.
Well, good to see you, John. I always look forward to our talks. What I wanted to do yesterday was to protect people from the narrative. And the narrative, the strategy of tension, is part of a narrative. And it actually exists on two levels. One, the simple level, and this is the definition on Wikipedia. It's a political policy that encourages violent struggle to create a climate of fear and insecurity, leading the public to seek security in a strong national security state. Now, as far as that goes, that's accurate. That happens. How often has it happened? We saw it with 9/11. We saw it with what's going on in the Maidan in Ukraine. Quite often you have these situations where there's a blow up of some sort, and the inability to understand it causes people to retreat into the protection of the state. And 9/11 is a perfect example because they passed the Patriot Act, and along with that introduced all kinds of surveillance and basically things that you wouldn't want, basically a police state. But that's only part of it. That part people can understand. What they don't understand is what's the intent. The intent is not just to set up a tougher censorship and control of what's being said. That's part of it. But more importantly, it's to take people's minds off the bigger issues, to get them focused on who's the enemy, who do we have to protect ourselves from. That was the point of my talk yesterday. And actually, I thought, from looking at the comments, most people got it. Now, of course, when you have 12,000 views and you get 160 comments, you don't know how many people actually got it. But I think the reason to bring it up is if you look at the post-World War II period, where we've had a whole series of crises, and very often these crises become moments where we lose part of our freedom, but we lose it willingly. We say there's a danger we don't understand, so we need the state to protect us. But while we're looking for the protection, the people who usually are the sponsors of the violent events have another intention, which is to make sure you're not involved consciously when there's a policy shift. And I bring up the Kennedy assassination as an example of that, because in the process of trying to figure out whether Lee Harvey Oswald was a Russian agent, whether he was just a lone nut, whether he was some kind of right-winger, whether he was deployed by the intelligence community, as this was going on, what happened? John Kennedy's policy was lost. The idea of détente went out the window. And even the best supporters of Kennedy got drawn into trying to figure out who killed him and why, which was important to know. But if you know what the intent is to change the policy, then it's easier to figure out who would have paid the assassin. And so our idea, LaRouche's approach to the strategy of attention, is figure out who's pulling the strings behind the scenes. Now, in the case of Charlie Kirk, here's a case that's kind of difficult because there are some policies that he was associated with, which I just can't go along with. I don't support, especially his anti-Muslim view, his idea that it's the left that's the biggest threat to the country, his support for Netanyahu, his support for the Zionist attack on the Palestinians. But now we find out something interesting. He was changing that view. And I don't know if you've seen the interviews with Candace Owens, who was a close friend of his, but she pointed out that he broke with Netanyahu. He was opposing Trump. He was saying that Trump should not be putting Israel first. Now, I wouldn't put it that way, but I'm just saying that here's an issue where he was bringing up some things that were important to discuss. And then what happens? We're caught in a situation where we're debating, was it the left wing who killed him? Was it communist? Was it vermin, as Trump said? Who did it? And in the meantime, what's the policy behind it? What's coming out? They want to silence opposition. And if there's one thing that Charlie Kirk at least said he was for, it was open debate, free debate. So in his name as a martyr, they want to silence the one thing that he was trying to fight for. And so it's an example of how if you don't know the bigger picture, you get trapped in the game that's being played for the purposes of the oligarchy. And so that was my message yesterday, and I hope it got across.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that it hit over 12,000 on your channel. I watched it on X, so I didn't see those numbers. But my comment still kind of stands because I'm speaking about the people on my feeds, on my Facebook, on my X, on my, that a lot of this just gets lost in exactly what you've said, and I think, to have that explanation here on McDuff Lives is very helpful. And I'm delighted that you're finding resonance among so many already. That's good.
Well, here's the problem that you know very well. There is an element of connectos, of whodunit, of an approach which is very pragmatic. Who engraved the bullets, who put the bullets in the gun, who brought him to the location, and so on. And those are things which tell you something, but not everything. What's the intent? Now, you can't even figure that out because most of the people who were involved in these assassinations, assuming the police get the right person, many of them are people who are somewhat disturbed, maybe went through some form of brainwashing in prison or in some kind of circumstance at school or something. So even they don't know why they're doing what they're doing. And that's the whole point of an assassination bureau, where you create an option of many different people who could be deployed to do the hit. And it's hard to figure out why they did it or track them down. And you see that with James Earl Ray. Saw that with in the case of Oswald. I think Oswald definitely was a patsy. So when you start looking at these things, it's easier to say, okay, let's put the dots together. Who did he know? Who helped him? Who got him the job at the book depository building? Well, when you look at these things, you begin to see a pattern. But the pattern doesn't always tell you the truth, because what it doesn't tell you is that the people who were doing that to help Oswald, many of them didn't know what they were doing, that he was supposed to be part of an assassination team. Because you can get people involved in these kinds of operations where they don't fully know what the end result will be. But what was the end result of the killing of Kennedy? We lost the possibility of ending the Cold War, which it's not sure that Kennedy would have been able to do that, but he and Khrushchev were moving in that direction. But how many people talk about that when they talk about the death of Kennedy? Sometimes you hear, largely because of Oliver Stone, that Kennedy was trying to get out of Vietnam. But the bigger picture there was the oligarchy wanted to keep a divided world. They wanted to have the East-West division, the two empires. And Kennedy began to realize, and he may have known it earlier, but it became increasingly clear to him that this would ultimately lead to war. So he's trying to move to change that. And that's what's been mostly lost in the 60-some years since we lost him.
And that's
except for you. You keep coming back to it.
Well, this is where viscerally I must go forward with this. I mean, I'm every Monday now. I've got 11 shows now called Undo the Coup, and I'm not talking about let's find out who pulled the trigger. I'm talking about the coup d'état that was behind the assassination, and the cover-up of it is the ongoing coup that continues to this day and can explain a lot of strange behavior by people, including President Trump, in my opinion, as to, well, of course, there's some hidden hand behind them. They've been turned into willing puppets all along. I think Andy Craig's book, Presidential Puppetry, is really definitive on that subject. It doesn't bring up past 2012, but the series of presidents that have been, just pulled this way and that way by the deep state, if you want to call it that, that is the coup. The idea that the American people don't get to choose their president, that's the core of it. Is, if you pick a president we don't like, then we're going to find some way to get rid of him. And so it's election by assassination is what I see, and it's very troubling that people just cannot open their minds and see that. And once again, you're absolutely right on point with all the different theories about who did it. Roger Stone said Johnson was behind it. I just listened to Daniel Sheehan yesterday saying it was Brown Brothers Harriman. And let me pause for a second so you can deal with that. But that's the mighty Wurlitzer to me. It's the CIA just saying, go ahead, put out 100 different theories, and in that way nobody will ever be able to figure it out. But they'll all be playing verbal ping pong back and forth, saying, no, it was this guy, no, it was that.
And they become increasingly passionate because if they'll read a book that fits their profile, whether they're left or right or left of center, right of left, you have all these gradations. But the people who write the narratives know that. They know the population. Mm-hmm. And they can craft a story that will move and activate a certain section of the population. Now, when you're in a situation like we are today, with a very polarized country, the Trump derangement syndrome really is probably about a third of the country lives under that. Probably about a third of the country believes that Joe Biden is a communist and was trying to destroy the country and turn us into a puppet of China. And another third doesn't care. And so you create the narrative so you get the 2/3 that care fighting each other. I mean, one of the examples I used, I can't remember if I used this yesterday in the program, was the Occupy Wall Street versus the Gingrich's group, the
Tea Party.
Tea Party.
Yeah.
That you had people who, if you ask them what they disliked the most about Obama, they would say, well, he did the bailouts and he did Obamacare. Both sides would agree to that. Now, those were fundamental dividing point, because there were people who liked Obamacare because they fell for the lies. And there were people who thought, well, if you don't bail out the banks, I'll lose everything. So you have a divided population. But what do? You end up doing it by left versus right. And you say, well, the reason we have the deficit we have is because there are too many giveaways for welfare and people from other countries and so on. And people get angry about that. That didn't build a $37 trillion deficit. At the same time, you have people who say, well, you have to bail out the banks because that's people's futures, it's people's deposits, and so on. And they become passionate about that because they may be on the verge of losing their home. And 5 to 7 million families lost their homes through foreclosure between 2009 and 2011. So you had an opportunity where, had there been a voice that was heard, and LaRouche had the right solution then, which was go back to Glass-Steagall, put an end to speculation, go to bankruptcy reorganization, jail the bankers who were corrupt, and protect the people who, if they're working but can't afford the mortgage with these sliding interest rates, redo their interest, their mortgage. There was a solution, but no one heard it because it was drowned out by the anti-LaRouche discussion and also the partisan fight. So we lost an opportunity, and that's what keeps happening.
Another aspect of your talk yesterday dealt with the BRICS and how, in your view, well, I won't say the employment of this assassination, but the taking advantage of the fact that everybody's engaged in, sorting out, the details, as you put it, of the Kirk assassination, facilitates the cover-up of what you consider to be the biggest economic story of the decade, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. How much do people know about what happened with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization? Some people know that Putin and Xi were there together. And some people know also that Modi was there. But what does that mean? They're told that those three are ganging up against the dollar, which is a lie. So you start with a lie, then you add to it. But more importantly, you don't let people actually hear what Putin said, what Xi said. Xi Jinping made a very excellent proposal for a new system of global governance, in which he essentially took the Peace of Westphalia, non-interference with other countries, work for the benefit of the other. He put this into a term that would fit with a trading policy for China. Now, here's something interesting, though. You know who responded to that? Donald J. Trump. And they're going to be meeting on Friday. Did you know that? Trump and Xi Jinping have a meeting set up now.
No. Is this an exclusive?
Well, no, I'm sure it's not an exclusive. I think it was on RT earlier today.
Okay.
But to go back to the point you were making, there's a potential for the United States to work together with the BRICS. But Trump is being told that the BRICS are anti-dollar. They're out to destroy the dollar. And that's a predominant line that comes from The Economist, the Financial Times, news sources that are opposed to the rejection of the International Monetary Fund system. So you just lie about it. You don't tell people what's going on. There's another thing that happened yesterday that was extremely important that was lost in the news cycle. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation, something I think is 40 or 50 Arab and Muslim governments, met in Doha, right down the street from where the Israelis blew up the Hamas negotiators. They issued a powerful statement, first of all, condemning Israel, but then secondly, calling on the United States to rectify its policy of supporting Netanyahu and the rest of the United States and Europe and the rest of the world to take steps to save Palestinian lives. How many people heard about that? And if you do hear about it, what you basically think is either these are the Arabs who caused the problem, or, well, they're always complaining. You don't have an ability to get on top of it and see what actually is going on there. Now, here's what I find ironic. Donald Trump has this idea of the Abraham Accords, which means to bring together the so-called moderate Muslim countries who are all there, UAE, Qatar, Egypt. I guess you could call the Saudis a moderate country. I'm not sure. But these are the countries that Trump is trying to get to form an agreement with Israel, recognize Israel, and put an end to the Arab-Israeli confrontation. But by giving Netanyahu the go-ahead to kill 100,000 Palestinians and to shoot the negotiators, in fact, I'm not sure whether Trump knew that Netanyahu was going to attack the meeting. But the meeting took place. Why? Because Trump said to Hamas, if you don't meet and resolve this, you're going to have hell to pay. So Hamas said, okay, we'll go. Now, somehow they got tipped off because their top people were not in the meeting. But there were fairly high-level Hamas officials who were killed. What does that do for the U.S. relationship with the so-called moderate Arab world? Are we literally setting leaders up to get killed by the Israelis? And then Netanyahu says, this was a great operation because we got some of our enemies. Well, today, I don't know if you heard Netanyahu's speech today, he said, we in Israel have to prepare to be isolated. We're going to be the most isolated country ever, but we don't care because we can take care of ourselves. So he's just taunting the rest of the world. And what is Trump going to do? Well, Trump apparently was angry at Netanyahu for doing that. But why was he angry? Well, one of the victims was the country of Qatar, which Trump just made a big deal with. He sold, I don't know, was it $500 billion worth of American airplanes? And then he got this expensive new Air Force One from them. So, and then his son, I think Donald Jr., just signed an agreement. The New York Times reported this today, an agreement with one of the, I think, nephews of the emir to have this is with the UAE, but to have a token, a Bitcoin, that's backed up by money from the UAE. And who are the partners in it? Trump Jr., Witkoff, and the emir. Doesn't that sound like corruption, John?
All of these, what you're trying to call moderate states, and I mean, yeah. Where did they come from? They all were born in corruption, and the corruption comes from, the colonialists.
Well, their leaders were chosen by the British during the mandate, the League of Nations mandate over Palestine and over the whole region. And so they chose the people they knew were corruptible.
Yeah, like King Saud.
Exactly.
I mean, I read a lot of details about the relationship between King Saud and Hugh Angleton, James's father, and a bunch of young males. Is pretty sad stuff. This world is controlled by a lot of very, very dark forces, and they use, somehow it's like, I used to think about, I guess it was the Jesuits that said, that when you understand that 2 + 2 = 5, then you're ready. Then you're ready to be a soldier of Christ, or whatever it is. And I think that's probably is mind control that goes on with people. I mean, if you can convince somebody that they were born in the wrong body, you can probably convince them of anything. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be a bit of a pattern that's very disturbing. And again, the whole transgender debate, it completely loses anybody that ever considered themselves to be a leftist of any sort. I mean, it's just there's no possibility that these trans people are mind controlled or created for for evil purposes, and yet there's a lot of manipulation of our people and our children that doesn't the newspapers don't tell us about. That's just my observation.
Well, and it's not just that they don't tell you, it's that they have another agenda. They have a different narrative. And on the economy, what's the narrative? Who's willing to make the hard cuts in spending? And what do they leave out? They leave out the whole way the United States became a powerful economy in the first place. It wasn't spending cuts, budget cuts. The founding fathers were happy to create credit because they knew that credit was the basis on which you could develop the country. You could build ports. The founding fathers didn't say we have to find private investors to build the ports. They said we need ports for the country, so we're going to allocate the funds for it. Now, the Phil Grahams and the budget cutters, the Tom Cottons and the people like that of the day were saying, well, the government shouldn't get involved in this. But it was George Washington. Actually, the first 5 or 6 founding fathers, every single one of them recognized that money that the government spent on infrastructure would be more than paid back by lessening the cost of transportation, of bringing goods to the market, and so on. So they understood economics. We don't have people who understand economics now. They think the whole point of an economy is to make some people rich, as opposed to make the nation wealthy. And that's a big difference.
Yeah, I was thinking yesterday, everybody thinks that the important thing to do is to save money. But I don't think the important thing really is to save money. The important thing is to have physical assets that you can depend upon, like a piece of land or a house or a car to get to work. I mean, just to store away money is that's what they want. They want, you put your money in the bank and then they can lend it out 8 times over with their multiple lending rules, and then if they fail, they're too big to fail. So once again, we get hit to fix that.
Well, under the Dodd-Frank bill, if the bank is going bankrupt, they have the right to seize your assets and treat it as it's their assets.
And nobody objects to these things. It's like we don't read the fine.
I don't think they know. How many people do you think know?
Nobody.
Well, Dodd-Frank was 2,000 pages. I don't think anybody read the whole thing, not even Barney Frank. So you get a bill that has all these codicils. And actually, when the bill was written, there were whole areas of regulatory policy which weren't filled out. And who did they ask to do it? Well, on derivatives, they went to the largest derivatives dealers and said, how do you think we should regulate derivatives? So it was the derivative dealers themselves who wrote the rules on how to trade derivatives. And what did they basically say? These should be treated as assets of the bank. And if the bank needs help, the Federal Reserve is there to bail them out. So, if people know these things, then they can be good citizens. A lot of times people will say to me, well, all right, I hear what you're saying. So what do we do? And I say, well, the first thing is you've got to have a voice at the table. And that's what our representative system is supposed to represent, but it doesn't. So if you have a congressman, just for example, like Steny Hoyer, who's not going to hear your voice no matter what do you do? Well, you could say, there's nothing you can do. Or you could try and figure out, how could we organize something to get rid of this bum? And
not me, man. No.
I already lost that fight, huh?
You ain't talking to me. I live here, okay? Oh boy, no, it is a unique circumstance here in Southern Maryland, where so much of our economy depends upon the military bases that we have here. We're very, very pro-military, very pro-police, very much entwined with national security. It's like national security depends upon Steny Hoyer as far as it looks to me. And so I don't know.
Well, that's how the strategy of tension works on the narrow basis, that you convince people that there is some good for the government for you. And they hold out little treats. And if someone gets a tax break for their business, they're happy, even if everyone else on their block loses their home.
Yeah, and so much of our, the real estate, is expensive because we have military bases with lots and lots of soldiers and officers that, and then they get pensions, and then they're able to build really nice big houses. I just don't think you can fight that right now here in Southern Maryland, and so maybe.
Well, I think I'm a great believer in Miguel de Cervantes and Don Quixote, and that you take on the task that everyone else says can't be done. But you have to win some of them, because if you can show that you can win some of these fights, then it emboldens everyone. And this was, if you think about what Lincoln did, working with the remnants of the Henry Clay movement and the Whig Party, he built a new party. But how did it become the presidential party? The crisis, the Civil War. And Lincoln was clever enough, and the people working with him clever enough, to realize that this would give them an opportunity to overturn the relationship between the Southern planters and the Northern bankers. And it succeeded. And it saved the nation. Well, would that happen today? If you think about it, on some level, I think I told you, I know Roger Stone, and Roger briefed me in 2016 on his strategy for the Trump election. This was in February of 2016. And at that point, I thought, well, Trump, he's kind of a joke. But Roger's not a joke. Roger's an actual thoughtful strategist, even though he says wild and crazy things sometimes. But what he pointed out is that what allowed Reagan to win was the idea of the Reagan Democrats. And he said the same thing could happen with Trump. And he was basing that on the fact that the Democratic Party had gone off in all sorts of crazy things, including today the woke politics and so on. But they lost track of the fact that their party grew because of Roosevelt fighting for the working man and for the farmer. And so that's what Roger laid out for Trump. Now, Trump, his election in 2016 was an insurgency. He took on the Bush machine, the Rhino Republicans, and destroyed them. They still are destroyed. But the problem was, what did he replace them with? And in his first term, it was the holdovers from the permanent bureaucracy that sabotaged him. Now, what's holding him back now? I think we could see something interesting. If he meets with Xi Jinping, and I don't know whether they're meeting in Washington or in China or where, but the last time Trump went to China, he came back and he was all enthusiastic about the infrastructure. Now, maybe there'll be a way that Xi can light a fire under him. The idea that between the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the African Union, there are huge markets, huge potential, and a big place for American corporations if you're willing to take advantage of it. Maybe that could happen. And that might be the exit door for the United States to get out of this global central bankers cartel and actually start investing again in real physical economy.
Well, doesn't this go back to the Atlantic Alliance, the kind of unbreakable special relationship with Great Britain? And do we not have to break that relationship in order to break away from the forces you just described?
We absolutely must break away with that. I mean, what do we gain from the special relationship? Did we get briefed early enough from British intelligence that there was an attack planned for September 11th? There are books coming out now. Declassified UK is saying that the British did have a hint, as did the US, George Tenet. So how did that special relationship help us? It actually did the opposite, because John Dearloffe, the head of MI6, and Tony Blair convinced George Bush that Saddam Hussein was out to kill his papa, Bush Sr., and that Saddam was developing weapons of mass destruction. So how did the special relationship help us? It got us entangled in that war, which we still haven't come out of. So then you see the other ironies. I mean, I'm really happy with something that happened this last week. Randy Mandy, Peter Mandelson, the British ambassador to the United States.
I don't know who he is, so I just want, there's obviously a lot behind this name. So give us a little more details about him.
Yeah, Mandelson was one of the top aides to Tony Blair. And Mandelson was known as, a guy who pursued young boys and young girls. And it wasn't surprising to find that Mandelson was a close friend of Jeffrey Epstein. Somehow that escaped the view of the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Starmer. The reason Mandelson was appointed as ambassador to the US is because the British always believed that you need someone in that position who can become a whisperer to the president, who can befriend the president on the basis of the Anglo-American special relationship, and can leak certain kinds of information and can develop that relationship. And that's what Mandelson was supposed to do. Now, Trump knew all about Mandelson. And at first he was opposed to it, but he basically figured, well, if I don't get Mandelson, I'll get some other chump. So he let it pass. But it doesn't look good, does it? That here you have the ambassador from Britain I think there are hundreds of emails back and forth where the two of them are praising each other, Epstein and Mandelson. So they had to bring him back. They had to rescind his ambassadorship. But you know what? They'll find someone who's a little less famous, but with the same pedigree. The previous ambassador, the one I think in Trump's first term, was the one who coined the term Trump whisperer. And he said, we have to flood the zone. We have to find all the key people who are with Trump, and we have to tell them what's necessary to maintain the special relationship. Now, in London, the possibility of a break with a special relationship is a matter of life and death, because they know, look, Europe can't stand up to Russia. If there really would become a war, Europe couldn't do it without the United States. They also need the United States economically, especially with Germany and France collapsing. So they're trying to figure out now, how do you become in good with Trump? What's their card? Royalty. The softness that Trump apparently has for King Charles. So they're hoping to parlay that into more influence. I hope like hell it doesn't work, because if it does, it shows that we don't have a real American patriot in the White House.
I remember in his first term when he visited the Queen and was seen walking kind of very disrespectfully away from and in front of the Queen, and a lot of people took hope in that maybe he's going to do it. But what would it look like? What would U.S. breaking away from Great Britain look like in the real world? I know it'd be horrible for the British, but what would we do? How could we get disentangled from this little country that keeps involving us in horrible wars?
Well, the first thing is to enforce real regulatory banking laws, because one of the reasons we use the City of London, one of the big elements behind their influence, is they use the offshore islands and the unregulated money flows. This is what Robert Maxwell was doing. This is what Edmund Safra was doing. You have a British unlimited spigot of money coming from drug trafficking, gun trafficking, and so on. So the first thing you do is you shut that down. You just say, we're not going to do this anymore. No American corporation can have a registration in the Cayman Islands and the offshore islands. Secondly, you then say, we're not going to listen to the British intelligence. You have people like Keir Giles, for example, who's Chatham House. He's written 4 books. And instead of books, you could have written a 2-page essay. Putin lies. He wants to conquer the world. We'd better be prepared to fight him. And he just goes on and on and on those points. Why do we need someone like that to advise us? His expertise is in manipulating Americans around their fear of the KGB. So what he writes about is that Putin's mentality is still shaped by the period he spent as a KGB low-level station operative in Dresden, Germany. Well, Putin is much more oriented toward the Russian Orthodox Church and Russian nationalism than he is the KGB. And in fact, he had to fight the KGB because a lot of the KGB people became the oligarchs who were partners in the West in looting Russia. So the idea that somehow Putin has a mentality as a third-level local KGB boss, and that's what defines Russia's policy, we made a big mistake. When Putin said Russia fears its potential loss of sovereignty because of the eastward expansion of NATO, Giles was saying that's a lie. That's just an excuse for gobbling up Ukraine. So what did the West do? They listened to Giles. You had a whole crew of Russian studies people in the CIA who didn't agree with that, but went along with it as part of maintaining the special relationship. Then you had Clinton had a relationship with Tony Blair, so did Bush Jr. And then all of them have relationships with Starmer now. So that's basically the problem. We could live without British intelligence. In fact, we'd be much better off because the old American intelligence system was much better. But the training has been lost, and we rely on British textbooks, British briefers, and so on.
The Five Eyes, huh?
Yeah. And I know that from hearing Ray McGovern, who is a genuine American intelligence officer, part of the presidential daily briefing team under Reagan and Bush. And what Ray says is that our publication, the EIR, is better than what they're getting in Washington from the CIA right now.
I believe it. Well, Harley, you have a hard stop at 15 minutes to the hour, so I'm afraid we gotta observe that.
Tell you, John, I'd much rather talk to you than go get a root canal, but I don't think I have a choice.
Oh, it won't be so bad, Harley. Just get it over with. I speak from experience.
Yeah.
All right. Good luck with that. And thanks again for your very generous spending of almost an hour with us here at McDuff Lives today.
See you in 2 weeks.
Okay. We'll see you back in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Yeah.